You hear a recording of your own voice, and for half a second, you don't recognize it. Then comes the cringe, sharp and immediate, the urge to reach for the pause button before anyone else has to hear it too. That reaction isn't vanity. It's your brain reacting to something that shouldn't be possible, hearing yourself for the very first time. Here's the strange part. You've heard your own voice every single day of your life. You've spoken tens of thousands of words this year alone. And yet, somehow, the version coming out of a speaker still sounds like a stranger. The answer starts inside your own skull, in a place most people never think about. When you speak, sound doesn't only travel out through the air to your ears the way it does for everyone else listening to you. A second pathway carries it too, straight through the bones of your skull, vibrating directly into your inner ear from the inside. That pathway adds depth. It boosts the lower frequencies, thickening your voice, giving it a fullness and warmth that a microphone can never capture. So the voice you think of as you has never actually existed outside your own head. It's a private mix, blended from two different sound sources at once, air and bone, heard by exactly one listener in the entire world. Everyone else has only ever heard the other version, thinner, higher pitched, missing that internal resonance you've mistaken for your real voice since the day you first learned to speak. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Every conversation you've ever had, every joke you've told, every argument you've won or lost, all of it happened with you hearing a completely different soundtrack than everyone else in the room. Two people can stand 3 feet apart, having the exact same conversation, and be listening to two entirely different versions of one of the voices in it. Nobody warns you about this growing up. You simply assume the voice in your head is the voice in the world, right up until a recording proves otherwise. There's a name for the jolt that happens when those two versions finally collide. In 1966, psychologists Philip Holtzman and Clyde Rousey studied this exact moment, playing people recordings of their own voices and documenting the reaction. They called it voice confrontation. Their subjects didn't just feel mild surprise, many described something closer to genuine distress, a visceral discomfort that went far beyond simple unfamiliarity. Why would hearing your own voice, something utterly ordinary, trigger a response that intense? Because it isn't only a sound problem, it's an identity problem. Your internal voice, the bone-conducted one, has been quietly wrapped up in your sense of self for your entire life. Every memory of speaking, every internal rehearsal of what you're about to say, every private thought you've ever silently spoken to yourself, all of it uses that same rich internal sound. Your brain built an entire model of you around that version. A recording doesn't just sound different, it severs the recording from the model. For one disorienting moment, the voice claiming to be you doesn't match the voice your brain has spent decades constructing. This mismatch isn't uniform across people either. Singers and professional voice actors often report a milder version of the reaction, and researchers studying this gap have noticed a pattern worth pausing on. The more often someone deliberately listens back to recordings of themselves as part of their training, the smaller that gap becomes over time. Their brain's internal model slowly stretches to include the external version, so the moment of confrontation softens into something closer to routine feedback than genuine shock. For most people, though, who almost never hear themselves played back except by accident, the model stays narrow, built entirely around the bone-conducted sound, which means every recording lands with the full force of first contact. This is where a second layer of the puzzle comes in, and it has nothing to do with sound waves at all. Psychologists Shelley Duvall and Robert Wicklund developed a theory in the early 1970s called objective self-awareness. Their idea was simple but powerful. Most of the time, you move through the world as the subject of your own experience, looking outward, rarely thinking about yourself as an object other people are perceiving. But certain triggers flip that switch: a mirror, a photograph, and, it turns out, a recording of your own voice. The moment that switch flips, you stop simply being yourself and start watching yourself, the way a stranger might. You suddenly notice things you'd otherwise never register. The particular rasp in your tone, a habit of trailing off at the end of sentences, a pitch that sounds nothing like the confident voice you imagined in your head. That sudden external vantage point is uncomfortable by design. It's your brain running a quality check on the gap between who you think you are and who you're presenting to the world, and recordings expose that gap instantly. There's a reason this feels so much worse than looking at an old photograph of yourself, even an unflattering one. A photograph shows how you looked in a single frozen instant. Something you already know changes constantly and forgives easily. A voice recording shows how you sound in motion, in real conversation, carrying every verbal habit you've built up without noticing across an entire lifetime. It doesn't feel like looking at a snapshot. It feels like being handed a transcript of exactly how you come across, minus any of the control you thought you had over it. Which explains something almost everyone has experienced, but rarely thinks to question. Why does the cringe fade the more you listen? Because repeated exposure retrains the model. Psychologist Robert Zionk spent decades studying what he called the mere exposure effect, the finding that simple, repeated contact with something unfamiliar gradually makes it feel more comfortable, more likable, more normal, even when nothing about the thing itself has changed. Voice actors, podcasters, and public speakers who once hated their recorded voice almost universally report the same arc. The horror is worst the very first time. By the 20th listen, it barely registers at all. Your brain isn't learning to like a new sound. It's slowly updating its internal model of your voice to finally include the external version, folding it in alongside the bone-conducted one you grew up with. There's a modern twist to this story too, one that goes beyond simple recordings. Voice researcher Rebecca Kleinberger, who studies the relationship between people and their own voices at MIT's Media Lab, has spent years exploring exactly why this discomfort runs so deep. Her work highlights something easy to miss. Your voice isn't just a sound you produce. It's one of the only parts of your identity that exists simultaneously inside your body and outside it, felt as vibration and heard as sound at the very same moment. No other part of how you present yourself works quite that way. Your face, your posture, your clothing, all of it is experienced by other people first and by you only secondhand, through mirrors or photos. Your voice is different. You feel it from the inside in real time, which means any mismatch between the felt version and the heard version lands with unusual force. Her research also points to something that separates voice from almost every other kind of self-image. You can angle a camera to flatter your face. You can choose clothes that hide what you don't like. But you cannot pre-edit the sound leaving your own throat before it reaches your own ears, because by the time you hear it through bone, it has already happened. There's no mirror you can adjust in advance. The confrontation only ever arrives after the fact, in a recording fully formed and impossible to soften. That's part of why a recorded photo of your face rarely causes the same reaction as a recorded clip of your voice. A photo was always going to be seen from the outside. A voice, until the moment of playback, never was. Think about how many places this small collision quietly shows up. Voicemail greetings you re-record 5 times before settling unhappily on the third one. Video calls where you angle away from your own preview thumbnail because hearing yourself talk in real time feels unbearable. Podcasts you almost don't publish because your own intro clip makes you wince. None of these moments feel connected on the surface, but they're the exact same mechanism, over and over, playing out in a dozen daily disguises. Consider what happens the very first time a small child hears their own recorded voice played back through a toy or a phone. Most freeze for a second, then laugh, delighted rather than distressed, pointing at the speaker as if it belongs to someone else entirely. That reaction only turns into cringing embarrassment later, once a stronger, more rigid sense of self has fully formed, once there's a fixed identity that a mismatched sound can actually threaten. The distress isn't built into hearing your own voice. It's built into having spent years constructing a self that a recording can suddenly seem to contradict. There's an odd bit of comfort buried in all of this, if you think about it the right way. Everyone else in your life has only ever heard the version of your voice you find so jarring. Your friends, your family, the people who love the sound of you talking. None of them have ever once heard the deep, bone-conducted version living inside your own skull. What sounds foreign to you has always sounded completely normal, completely familiar, completely you, to literally everyone else who has ever listened. The mismatch was never a flaw in your voice. It was a gap in your own access to it, a private acoustic blind spot nobody else on Earth shares with you. There's something worth sitting with in that fact. Every person you've ever admired for their voice, a favorite singer, a calm-sounding parent, a friend whose laugh you love, has almost certainly cringed at their own recordings too, hearing a thinner, stranger version of a sound you find completely warm and familiar. The gap runs in both directions. For every single person who has ever spoken a word out loud, you are, at this very moment, someone else's favorite voice, sounding exactly the way you're supposed to sound to absolutely everyone except yourself. Which means the wince you feel hearing a recording isn't a judgment on how you sound. It's simply the sound of two different versions of the same voice meeting each other for the very first time. One built from bone and memory, the other built from air and truth, colliding for a fraction of a second before your brain quietly does the work of stitching them back together. Given long enough and enough repeated listening, it always does. Modern life has quietly multiplied the number of times this confrontation happens too. A generation ago, most people heard a recording of their own voice, only rarely, maybe an old home video, an answering machine tape. Now, voice notes, video calls, podcasts, and saved messages mean the average person hears themselves played back constantly, sometimes daily. In one sense, that's uncomfortable. In another, it's exactly the repeated exposure that eventually closes the gap. The generation growing up narrating voice memos and recording themselves on camera from childhood is, without realizing it, running the exact experiment that shrinks voice confrontation before it ever gets the chance to fully form. You hear a recording of your own voice. This time you catch the flinch before it fully forms, and you understand exactly what's happening behind it. That isn't a stranger's voice on the speaker. That's simply you, heard from the outside for once, the way everyone who has ever loved listening to you has heard you all along.